once the dialogue stops, then you don't have a snowball's chance in hell. But if you can keep the dialogue alive, maintain that civility, the respect for the other side, even when you are very angry, then I think what can emerge out of that can actually be progress and not devolve.
Him targeting these two people as individuals in the Guard doesn't stop the Guard from being here. It doesn't stop or solve any issues of the National Guard being in DC or of Trump deploying them here or wanting to deploy them other places as well.
We're not opposed to talking about positive stories, and
please
we tried. You guys have got to give us positive things to talk about, though. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 33 of Washed Up. I'm Colin, this is Abby, and we are here to deliver the weekly news so you don't have to listen to the legacy media that your grandparents do.
And I think we should jump right into it. We said we're going to take a break, so we've been thinking about what happened right before Thanksgiving break, which is the shooting that attacked two National Guard members, one of whom, Sarah Beckstrom, she passed away, and the other one, Andrew Wolfe, who is in critical condition but is on the healing.
Yeah, and this happened the day before Thanksgiving. Neither Abby or I was in DC at the time, but we did also want to mention the fact that it was very close to where we live, so it was kind of disconcerting just from that angle. As soon as they announced, it was right by the White House on, I believe, 17th Street. Abby and I were texting back and forth because we're each about a couple miles from exactly that location. So it was really hard to imagine, and it's a very public area. So this attack that took place, yes, it may have been targeted against the Guard specifically, as far as we can tell, but it still happened in public, and I'm sure a lot of people were witness to it and now feel less safe as a result of this news.
And yeah, like Colin said, it happened actually very close to where I used to work. And my job at the time was closed that day through that Friday, so I don't think there was many people around that I knew there. But we were texting about it back and forth. I actually heard from Colin first because that was actually the first thing that I looked at when I landed in Vegas, I think, like when you texted it to me.
And it is important, I think, to note the timing of it, that it was before Thanksgiving. It certainly is a tragic event, regardless of when it takes place, but even more so to think about, the families of the Guard who maybe were expecting to see their family for Thanksgiving. And I know Andrew Wolfe's mother has been very active on social media, just giving updates about how her son is doing, and I think that's been helpful for the public to know. People can wish him well and support him and encourage him as he's going through that terrible healing. But yeah, just thinking about Sarah's family and the fact that she wouldn't be home for Thanksgiving, and I was also struck by how young that she was.
20.
Yeah, and so she was younger than Abby and I, and to think about, I'm not sure what her expectations or hopes were for the future, but it's completely unfair and tragic that she no longer has a future.
And a lot of people have been talking about it, I think, in DC and just all over the news. Uh, Trump obviously had been talking about it a lot too, and I think that it's really important to talk about where people are placing blame in it, because I think that it's ignited a lot of different parties to be angry, but about different sorts of things.
Right, and so we should probably mention too, the shooter was a 29-year-old Afghan man, and we try not to mention names of shooters. Just as a rule, we think it's better not to publicize that in case they are after attention or something like that. But yeah, he had come to the U.S. in or around 2021 as a result of the Afghanistan withdrawal. There were some allies of the U.S. who had been doing work with U.S. intelligence and whatnot, and so they were brought into the U.S. as a way of kind of protecting them from revenge, possibly by the Taliban when the Taliban retook control of Afghanistan. And so a lot of people, like Abby was saying, have been pointing fingers, trying to say, well, whose fault is it that this particular Afghan man was here? And if he was radicalized, why did they bring him here, allow him in at all? And this has sparked a lot of debate and controversy.
Mm-hmm. For example, Trump was talking about getting rid of everyone who is on asylum or anything like that. It's brought a lot of immigration issues into play slash immigration rules into play too that people have been talking about and getting angry about. We were kind of talking about the individuality of people in the Guard and how I think I mean we've been talking about the National Guard for a while now on the podcast, especially as people living in DC and seeing them. And for the most part, like they just in my opinion, they just like kind of chill around. Like they don't do much harm, but I think it's as individuals, but I think it's just the essence of the Guard in general being here that pisses people off, which I think is rightfully so, like being in your city and having it feel like a big brother sort of thing, at least in my opinion, at least of the people that I've been talking to. Um, so I understand why people are angry about that, but what I don't understand and what I don't excuse is the violence towards individuals within that system, like the death of this young girl or this young woman, and the injury that Wolf is healing from right now.
Right, exactly. And since the National Guard was deployed in DC in early August, as Abby said, we've brought it up several times on this show. And I would say our tone toward the Guard has also shifted as they've been here longer and longer, as DC has had to kind of accustom itself to the Guard being like a permanent fixture here. I think when it first happened and they were deployed, personally, I felt pretty freaked out about it. I thought it was going to stoke a lot of tension between, citizens and military slash police presence. And luckily, we had made it since August without having an incident between those two camps. I wish I could say it wasn't somewhat expected that the tension over the many months would build into something like a direct attack on the Guard. But unfortunately, that's not. I would say, and as much as I condemn it and think that it's terrible, I also think that it was possibly a predictable consequence of their deployment here.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me very sad because it seems like an unforced error, like it didn't maybe need to happen. People have certainly been blaming the Trump administration for the fact that the Guard were killed, which I don't think is fair, but the reason why they're doing that is because the Guard wouldn't be here if not under the direction of, the executive branch.
Mm-hmm. I think that people are trying to place a lot of blame without actually looking at the core sort of issues that are here in it. There's a lot of, like, Colin and I always talk about divisiveness in ideologies and in parties and how to solve that. Like, for us, like, we do things like Washed Up and we try to incite conversation. And for both of us, I think that I could say things like political violence is something that we don't really stand for because it also doesn't doesn't result in the conversation that we want to happen in the way that we're very like pro like free speech, like let's talk about this and like let's solve it from the root of its issues. And something like this happening, like this Afghan man doing this, is like, and people blaming now a whole group of people just because of their race or because like this man comes from somewhere, and blaming like a whole party of people is also not solving anything, in the same way that him targeting these two people as individuals in the Guard doesn't stop the Guard from being here. It doesn't stop or solve any issues of the National Guard being in DC or of Trump deploying them here or wanting to deploy them other places as well.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at there is extremely important, that violence, as we've seen time and time again with all the political violence that has happened this year that we've talked about extensively, it very rarely, if ever, accomplishes the goals that people profess they actually are enacting the violence on behalf of. So that's number one. And then number two, like you've mentioned, it doesn't allow people to interact and have those conversations on the level of the individual, which is, I believe, the only productive level of organization from which change can really percolate and take effect. And so the more and more that we attach ourselves to these sort of like group identities, whether that be like, they're in the National Guard and so therefore I can do to them like I can enact my animosity toward the National Guard on these individuals without consequence, or they belong to XYZ party, and so therefore, like, I can treat them, poorly or even be violent against them. It robs people of their humanity, and that's something that we keep trying to bring it back to. There's just so many ways that our discourse has robbed people of their humanity. Unfortunately, like that seems like a very common theme. And so, for what it's worth, for what we're able to do for the purposes of our show, is I feel like we always try to bring it back to the individual. Like when Charlie Kirk was shot and killed, like say what you will about the political and how you feel about what he said in that realm, but he was still a person and he still had dignity. And on that basis alone, we should be treating people with respect and taking their death as a tragedy when it happens because of violence.
Yeah, how have you seen the conversation in DC since this took place? Have you seen any changes? Have you seen results from different, I guess, maybe opposing parties or anything like that?
Well, like I said, like what you had said too, it definitely immediately reverted back to trying to find blame, trying to assign blame. And I have very rarely, if ever, seen that be effective. I definitely think people are rattled about it in the same way that they were from like other instances of violence this past year. I'm always bringing it again back to also the effect that it has on the public and our willingness and ability to put ourselves out there and to speak our minds. I think there's always a chilling effect in the aftermath of violence because people see what happens um, when you are out there public in the public realm and the attention that that could garner you, and you don't want to be on the receiving end of a lot of hate or blame or anger or animosity in the aftermath of these things, so people tend to kind of shut down. And that's been my perception of what DC has done in the wake of the National Guard being shot, is kind of shut down, turned inward a bit, and hasn't really um, been very outspoken.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of different responses from um, different people. Like I said, like the Trump admin, inciting a lot of anger against people who are immigrants. I think that there's been a lot of anger there, and the guard itself. I'm also somebody who didn't want the guard to be here. I feel like a lot of people in DC didn't want that. And I remember one of our episodes where we were talking about like forms of protests that we liked, and a lot of them were like just like creative, like kind of like funny pokes, and that brought people to talk about things and bring attention to things. And like I'll always be more in favor of those things, but it was not anything to do with creating violence for, at the end of the day, a dead end. Like I don't think anything like this that happens for good reason slash in any way helps something move forward, like a movement to really move forward. In that I think it almost discredits people in like a very rash way.
Right. Yeah, it shuts down conversation. And you mentioned we need to find ways to open up possible conversations in addition to finding ways to bring it back to the level of the individual so that those engagements can happen across perhaps divisions, rather than finding ourselves more entrenched in whatever division pre-existed the act of violence. I would love to talk more in the future on this show about like our own ideas for how to combat what we perceive in society to be going wrong, and to do so with the creative flair and in the spirit that I think our country was founded on, which um, early on in our country, they were very creative about the ways that they expressed their discontent. I'm thinking of like the Boston Tea
I
Party.
literally was about to say, like, I was thinking about the chief. I was literally thinking that as you were describing that.
So, like forms of protest that are effective and aren't going to Not that that didn't devolve into violence, because you could argue that the Revolutionary War in itself was kind of violent. But, like finding ways to express discontent that allow people to feel heard and feel like their voice is getting out there, but aren't going to maybe escalate is a good way to put it.
What would you say to people who find that violence is the only way to move forward?
I would just encourage people to, in as much as our founding was, very
Yeah.
revolutionary, it was also based in these principles of civility. And there was a lot of attempts by our like founders to, even what they were getting at was they were trying to break away from England, but they wanted to do so in the right way. It wasn't just like a willy-nilly, we're going to swing our arms around and get everyone really angry and launch a overthrow of the English in the US colonies. But rather, like, they were very systematic about it. They were very communicative about their grievances. They first took the time to put their grievances into words that they could express. And so they weren't just fighting on behalf of like a very unclear cause, but they were saying like, these are our reasons why we're really pissed off. We're going to send it directly to the king so he knows exactly why we're so angry. And then they allowed him to respond, and there was this like there's a dialogue, and once the dialogue stops, then you don't have a snowball's chance in hell. But if you can keep the dialogue alive, maintain that civility, the respect for the other side, even when you are very angry, then I think what can emerge out of that can actually be progress and not devolve.
Hmm.
What about you? How do you think you can keep people from devolving into violence, but then also for people who are convinced that that's like the only path forward, how do you, I guess, convert them to civility?
I I think that, like you said, like I really like to encourage things like this. And even I'm even thinking about when Kamala Harris was talking about it at her talk, and talking about how humans are like meant to create, and we're meant to express ourselves through things like art, and music is like another revolutionary form of protest. Like throughout history, American history, like people were always singing about things that they wanted to happen, things that they wanted to move forward with, like when it comes to racism, and when it comes to a lot of oppression. Yeah, I like so many of those songs like in the 60s, 70s were about that, and like the rise of like angry punk rock even like was a huge factor. I took this politics and music class,
Right,
and
I love that. That's
we did
really
like
cool.
our final project was each of us had a decade, and we had to like tie it to some type of revolution. And it actually like really was like almost every single song, like people I hate that people don't even realize it, or like have forgotten. Even in today, like people are always singing about things that they want to break away from. Like it's about more than just like love and friendship, but also about the anger that people have. I think that's a great way to express yourself. I also think that it's really hard sometimes to convince people that maybe violence isn't the answer, because also in our history there has been a lot of violence. So it's like sometimes people will be like, oh, well, that's everything, that how we made change, like um in when people were fighting like race wars and things like that, and how real change ended up happening. And I think I teeter that line a lot of like how to approach someone and how to bring up that conversation without being insensitive to the fact that I guess America does have a lot of, not I guess, America does have a lot of violence within its history.
Right, but I really love that idea that you put forward about music and creativity as forms of resistance. And in as much as you said, like our history has a violent history, we also have that history of being very, very creative. And I think the ingenuity of the U.S. has always kind of been a trait that we've valued and expanded as the country's gotten older. So I'm curious for your project, what song or era did you hone in on for? when you
I
did that?
had gosh, this was my sophomore year of college. I think I had my group had like the 70s maybe or the 60s. Maybe it was both eras. I remember really liking somebody's presentation that they did on the 90s. It was a lot of integration of rap and rap culture, and like at the time like people were very much like, oh my gosh, rap is evil, like rap is this, like it's like not, it's like trashy, or it's like it's only about drugs and all this stuff. But there's like, for example, like Tupac, like he has said, he's an amazing writer, and he said so many things that I think are like still relevant to this day, like
Well,
Thug Life.
I was also thinking of there's a song that I came across like semi recently called "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," and I love that song because it goes
You
through.
just came across that
Well, yeah, yeah, yeah.
one.
I know it's a very popular song. I'm late to the game on that one, but it like goes through this really comedic but like real list of things that like are not actually revolutionary. There's one line that's coming to mind. It's like the revolution will not. It's not Jackie Onassis blowing her nose, which I think is hilarious because we get like so caught up in these like stupid, mundane like arguments, and so that's why I love that song because it's calling out all of the BS of like your daily maybe news cycle, the stuff that will come across your feed, or you'll be like it'll be pushed by like a media outlet or something, but it has nothing to do with the actual like changes that are taking place within society. And so I don't know. I hope that we can kind of accomplish that on this show and like always try to bring it back to the first principles and bring it back to the changes that actually would benefit society and not just your like way up in the sky what celebrity was like blowing their nose that day.
I think Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl performance was a really good example of something that had a lot of messaging in there, to everything that was happening, that everything that is still happening at the time, and that
President Trump
whole.
was there for that too.
And I loved that he did that, and I loved everyone's response to that, and I loved everyone analyzing it. Like there was just so much to talk about, and that whole like album and all those songs are, a lot of it is about, like challenging certain rhetoric.
Yeah, and actually the next year's Super Bowl performer, I remember when they announced it, it was causing the same sort of like media um, division between like everyone's really mad. Some people because it was Bad Bunny, who his
Mm-hmm.
audience is mostly Hispanic slash Spanish speaking, so they're saying like, oh, they picked him to like, make a statement. And okay, first of all, I'm pretty sure wasn't Bad Bunny number one on Spotify? Like I think at some point
That makes a lot of sense
if
if he
not
is.
for a while, he's been like way up in the charts. So I think it was kind of ridiculous that they were accusing that selection of being, biased or performative in some way when I think he is a very popular artist. But I'm sure we're going to see when the next Super Bowl comes around too, the same kind of discourse that we saw around Kendrick Lamar's performance, where people are like trying to make it political and take sides when really we should just be observing and trying to extract from the
Like listen to the
performance and the art.
messaging and
Yeah. Is there anything like we can take out of that and apply to the changes that we're trying to make?
yeah, I think the art and narrative in general is such a powerful thing. Like humans by nature are narrative beings, and changing the discourse through like the narrative paradigm is genuinely like how we really get true change. Like I think like it's the same way with like the Republican Party right now. Like I think that the only way you can convince like super brainwashed like MAGA people that like everything's like there's so much propaganda in what Trump is saying and what he's doing is from the inside out, and it's the same way that I think the Democratic Party needs to change. Like it only works from the inside out.
So our audience may not know of this figure, but there's this guy Andrew Breitbart who founded like a news media organization. He was very right leaning, and so he's very controversial for that reason because people see him as responsible for like bringing in Steve Bannon to the equation and like founding Breitbart and like amplifying a lot of very right wing narratives, but he had a saying that I think is very true, where he said that um, politics is downstream of culture, and make of that what you will, but I think that kind of fits into the conversation that we're having of, if you really want to affect politics, violence isn't necessarily the answer. It's actually like, if you can make waves within the culture in all the ways that we just outlined and many more, that's probably the most effective way of directing politics in the direction that you are trying to.
Mm-hmm. Um,
So I think, though, there's another breaking news story this week about, well, having to do with political violence. In this case, it was a failed act of political violence where the FBI arrested a suspect in relationship with the pipe bombs that were
mm-hmm.
placed outside of the DNC, and RNC, I believe, on January 6th, 2021.
Mm-hmm. Cash Patel's been under fire for that one too.
Yeah, so what did you see about the person of interest who they apprehended, and do you have any like information on what he might have been motivated by?
No, I was actually going to ask around what I think what people thought the reasoning for everything that was happening there, because I mean maybe it's because the news is so convoluted right now, but I'm also confused. Which is
Yeah.
something that we were talking about too.
I think convoluted is a great word for it. There's almost like so many instances of violence happening, like people aren't really taking the time to fully break down like who was motivated by what. And we should probably, let me just go back real quick to the shooting of the National Guard. Yes, it could have been motivated by a multitude of factors, but it seems like what they've pieced together so far is it probably was an act of extremism and radicalization that occurred. He said Allah Akbar allegedly when he shot the two guards. So just wanted to point that out. But with this person who put the bombs outside of the DNC 5 years ago, it is a little bit less clear because he didn't like announce or make any remarks about indicating what his motivation could have been. Obviously, this was happening on the backdrop of the election of 2020, where Donald Trump was saying, it was stolen, that the Democrats, through various different like mail-in ballot schemes and other means, had somehow like subverted that election in favor of Biden. So there's questions about, was this man who placed the bombs, he was around 25 at the time,
Mm-hmm.
was he doing it because he believed what Trump was saying, or was he doing it for some other ulterior reason?
Has people been Do you think that different groups have been talking about it differently?
I do. I've even heard some people questioning like whether the man who placed the bombs was actually somehow a Democrat, which I find a little bit strange. Every
But like how?
well, it's like what you said about it being very convoluted, the discourse around what someone's motivations may or may not be. It is very convoluted because each side is who's entrenched in their own view is going to automatically try to make the other party responsible for it in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
When I think the reality of this, many of these situations is just that the people are very like, they're like loners. They're isolated. They don't really feel like they fit in any party or any mainstream ideology. So that's why they feel like they must act violently or through some other means to be heard.
You
So
can find like the character arc for these like attackers and things like that, like basically out of the textbook. Like I'm thinking about like even the updates right now with Luigi Mangione, it like reminded me of when that first happened and how that was also all over social media and like people were taking like crazy sides on that one too, I thought.
And then another example being the would be Trump assassin and what his motives were, because I mean, Tucker Carlson has been doing a series trying to dissect like what this man's political ideology was, and they can't make heads or tails of it because at some point went very right leaning, and then at some point he had a weird flip and went very left, and it's like, I think a hallmark of people who carry out acts of violence is they don't feel like they belong to any camp at all, and again, that's sort of at play in what drives them toward. violence as the what they see as the solution.
It's the same way, not just even with political violence, like even school shootings and public shootings and things like that. Like those people who feel like they're taking it on themselves to solve something or take out their anger towards a certain system when that certainly isn't the case of how to go about it.
So the men who put the bombs on January 5th outside the DNC in anticipation of January 6th, where there was, a big planned protest that was about to happen that day, as they were going to certify the results of the 2020 election. The reason why it's so consequential is because even though the bombs didn't go off, I think we'd be living in a very different timeline had those bombs detonated. And so there are grave concerns about how he was able to get away with it and then evade detection and arrest for now almost 5 years. And there are certainly a lot of big questions there that I think will start to fill in now that he's been apprehended. And according to Kash Patel, who went on Megyn Kelly's show yesterday, they're very, very confident that this is the guy. But obviously they have to proceed with the due process of all of it.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully, in that due process, we will get some answers about again how he evaded detection for so long and what his motives might have been, etc. And okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. When we went to go see Kamala Harris, didn't she bring this up and say she mentioned the fact that she had come within like 20 feet of this bomb outside of the DNC? Do you remember that?
No, but I wouldn't write it off
Mm-hmm.
as something that she didn't say.
I don't remember if she said it there or I've
So I
I've
don't
certainly
know.
heard it since then that Kamala Harris as the VP elect had come in close proximity to one of these failed bombs, and that's a huge deal for very obvious reasons. And I think it does make me see Harris a bit differently, knowing that she's aware of the fact that she was in such close proximity to that on January 6th. I think it gives her all the more reason to feel like this is very personal, the
Mm-hmm.
politics of all of it. And I actually do respect Harris for the fact that um, she's able to maintain a level of civility, even though, her and all other politicians are under a increased threat in recent years, unfortunately.
I think this has been a pretty consistent theme in the last few episodes that we've been talking about in terms of like political violence, violence in general, and the increased threat against public people in politics when that wasn't always the case. Like even on like the state level, I think people are more afraid.
And it sucks because I very much like wish we could talk about other things sometimes, but
Colin texted me like I think last week or maybe a few days ago, and he was like, "Here are the major things I think we should talk about." And then he said something like, "Maybe we could try to talk about something lighter too, but I don't know." And even like before coming here, I was listening to a bunch of podcasts on the way here to try to like, I guess, last minute like sift through the news, but like it truly does feel like sifting through it. Like I don't really know all the facts because they come one they update so often, two there's like so much bias in the way that people are presenting things, so it's really hard for me to be able to look through things and form it's not hard for me to form an opinion, but it's just hard for me to make sure that my opinion is validated by the fact that all the facts that I know are correct, if that makes sense.
my point would just be we're not opposed to talking about positive stories, and
Please, please bring
we've
it
tried.
positive.
You guys have got to give us positive things to talk about though at the same time. And I do think there's sort of this narrative in the media where it's like if really bad stuff is happening, then you can't talk about positive things because that would be like disregarding or disrespectful to all of the trouble that's out there. And I totally get that, but we would love to make it a little bit lighter on occasion. We try to do
Well,
like album reviews. We try to do like with the Coldplay concert with the pop culture stories. We'll like sprinkle them in here and there. But I think my main point is you guys have got to give us more positive things to talk about because we don't really want to be talking about political violence over and over and over every single week. I mean, it's good. I do think we can make an impact and maybe bring certain stuff to people's awareness and attention that they might not get through other media outlets. So I feel productive talking about this kind of thing, but we would hope that things will settle down and we can start being a little bit lighter again.
Mm-hmm. I guess speaking of lighter topics, I know we didn't talk about this before, but one of our mutual friends texted us and she was like, "Hey guys, I really need your opinion on the propaganda that Wicked 2 is talking about in the commentary on that." I don't know if
Okay.
you've seen Wicked 2.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is somebody
I
who,
have not seen it, but I've
okay.
seen all of the press around it. So maybe if you give me an overview of Wicked 2, then
Have you
I
ever
can.
seen the first Wicked at all? Like,
No,
you
but
know about
I know the
Wicked, the
premise of
vibe?
it. Yeah.
It's basically like, it is about Galinda and Alphaba's friendship and how Galinda doesn't really have magic or anything like that, but she's been painted as this like good witch because Alphaba is basically trying to save all these animals who are being tortured. Because in this universe, animals can like talk and speak and teach, and they're like sentient beings who like are out there like in the world. And the Wizard of Oz and their like team wants to trap these animals in cages, which takes away their voices and they can't learn how to speak. But the only
Hmm.
people who know about it, mhm,
Hmm.
the only people who know about it are Elphaba and Galinda. And Elphaba had tried. She's the one who does have magic, so she tries to save the animals, but the Wizard of Oz turns it around, and to Oz, they think that Alphaba is like the Wicked Witch, basically.
Oh wow.
When in the
Okay.
background she's trying to save it, and then Galinda is being painted as like the good witch, like trying to defeat Alphaba,
Uh-huh.
when she's also on Alphaba's side as well. So there's like a lot of like that's like why our friend had like brought up like the propaganda of it and how she
Hmm.
said she thought of us because it's something like we always talk about and it is really relevant to everything that's been happening here. But there's just like it's just like very layered. Obviously, Wicked is not a new story told. Like it's always been within the media, but like nowadays it I guess is like more popular because of the on-screen version. Anyways, so to say the least, like that was kind of the summary of like what's happening, I guess, in it right now and why she was like, "Oh, we I need to hear your thoughts on this."
Well, I'm flattered that she thought of us because we do like to talk about media and how the more the time that you spend sort of like on the inside of media, you do see how many of the narratives that are constructed are just that. Like they're not organic. They're very oftentimes being pushed by like multiple different outlets at the same time in coordination on a certain schedule because it's most effective. Kind of, we've seen like, politicians do this too, like they quote unquote flood the zone. And I think
Mm-hmm.
people in media recognize like there's a strategy to getting a story out, and sometimes it does require that coordination behind the scenes. And we, as independent media, we like to analyze that and break it down and say, okay, well, who's actually coordinating with who in this case? And on the surface, it might look like these are opposing forces, but actually, how are both of them mutually benefiting off of, stoking this narrative or that? Um, yeah, I have a couple of stories I could share, but I'm gonna save them for another time. My big awakening to how coordinated legacy media really was, it happened.
We should do like
I'm
a
gonna save
bonus.
it, but
Okay, we should do like a bonus episode on times where we started to, I guess, like really look at the news and think to ourselves, like, oh, wait, this is like a little propaganda, or like, oh, this is like a little biased, or something like that.
I'll just say to our audience, like, if you see something in the national news, the chance that it's organic is slim to none, because yes, those big outlets do take like tips and hints, and they'll write, like a on the ground story that might blow up organically because it's like human interest in the right way at the right time. But I'd say way more often, the media and the politics of it all are intertwined, and they are in some ways coordinating or serving on behalf of some special interest in order to promote a certain narrative at a certain time. So just if you see it in the national news, start to question why and who's
Right.
benefiting from it.
I agree with that.
So okay, another thing that's been going around in relationship to Wicked is the relationship between Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo. I just want to know, what do you think about that?
I I've seen a lot of discourse and a lot of people talking about their relationship. I have been an Ariana Grande fan for a while, so like I know like she's a very good like chameleon when it comes to like well, it's probably what makes her such an amazing actress and performer. Not saying I don't know her, so like she probably has like a very like her own personality, but like and Ariana fans will like even tell you like throughout the years you see her like aesthetic, her voice, like her style change so much based off the people she's surrounded with. Um, and I think that her like being involved with in Wicked and like their set in general, like it seems like I see a lot of jokes about it being like very cult like. They're like, what happened to them on Wicked? Or they'll be like, oh my god, they were starving all of them on Wicked or something like that because of just that's a whole other topic though. I think like eating disorder culture is kind of coming back in Hollywood and then
Thanks to Ozempic, maybe.
yeah, maybe, I don't know. It's
Who
just like
knows?
it just feels very like rise of skinny
Also,
stick
recession.
culture. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is recession core.
Well, okay, as far as the relationship between the two actresses, it definitely seems a little overwrought to me. Just the ways that they're like very, very like touchy personal with each other all the time, and like the ways that they try to appear on camera, like very kind of like overly gushing and empathetic. It definitely puts me off just a little bit. I'm like, why? Who advised them at what point, or is this truly organic, just like who these people are, or is it like again a media strategy? And
Mm-hmm.
I
It's
hate.
probably
I
a
think
combo of
both,
both.
probably.
I don't know. I saw the movies and I was like, damn, I'd be crying all the time too if I had been shooting this for 5 years.
Yeah, and so like I'm sure that it is probably at both ends where like yeah, they probably are close from having worked together and maybe their personalities are authentically just that way and
And Ariana's been talking forever about how it's her dream to be in a live action role on Wicked. Like literally since she
specifically
was
Glinda, right?
Glinda, yeah. Like literally since she was like on Victorious when she was a teenager. Like that was her dream role. So I'm glad that she gets to add it to her accolades.
Well, I have a lot of respect for both of them as artists and
Mm-hmm.
actresses, and you can tell, like what you were saying about Ariana. I agree. I think when she has like an era in the same way that like Taylor Swift does, she'll very much give herself like completely to the art of it and the aesthetic of it, and clearly puts a lot of thought and attention and time into making it like a cohesive, marketable art product or aesthetic. And so I have a lot of respect for that, but it can be a bit much sometimes where like are they some artists are known to like lose themselves in that a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
where they kind of just become a reflection of like whatever the culture demands that they be at that time. And I think that's kind of the internal struggle of many artists, is how do you create and devote yourself completely to your creation but not lose yourself at the same time. I think Ariana struggles more with possibly losing herself in it at times.
Mm-hmm. I wonder what kind of artist I am. Who knows? I guess we'll see. I tend to lose myself in a lot of things too.
Would you say we've lost ourselves and washed up?
Oh, 100. I feel like since devoting myself to being like a journalist, I've lost myself a lot.
Wait, how so?
Not being dramatic. Like I literally can't read a headline without being like, oh, but like, did they write it this way because A, B, C, D, or like blah blah blah, or like, oh, the inflection that they said that with, that was kind of sus. Like, what's their background? Like, blah blah blah. I hate that I do that when I used to be so cool and oblivious.
See, I was watching like commercials over Thanksgiving, just like random like product like TV commercials, and I was watching them and I could not. I remember when I was young and as a kid, I would just take it all at face value and be like, oh, like they're promoting their skincare product. But now it's like my brain will just go off on so many tangents.
Mine will too.
Like, why did they choose that decision and
I'm
that
like,
shot and
that
that
color did
artist?
this.
Yeah, like what are
Oh,
they trying to evoke and how are they selling this? And it's just like my brain can't shut off. And so I feel for you in that sense. Like being in the journalism
so
scene makes you
far.
so cynical. We have to make sure to remind ourselves not to always be that cynical,
Hmm.
even though it serves us very well in this particular lane, I would say.
Anyways, so that was a fun little lighthearted ending. If you would like it to be more lighthearted and fun at times, feel free to text us if you know us personally or email us, washupweekly@gmail.com. Or comment.
And we will try to integrate as many light pop culture-ish stories as we can, despite the fact that news is on a permanent downward spiral.
Yep. Anyways, washed up
Step
out.
out.